Welcome to our comprehensive training answering every what if about lease options. I'm Chris Goff. I'm going to be your host as we dive deep into the world of lease options. It is a flexible and powerful strategy in real estate. Those of you that do follow me, this is one of my favorites. Whether you're an investor considering maybe adding this strategy to your toolbox, or maybe you're a potential tenant buyer exploring a different way to home ownership. Lease options can present a multitude of questions and uncertainties, from the mechanics of how lease options work to potential risks and rewards. We're here to break down every aspect of this innovative real estate strategy, and our goal is to equip you with the knowledge and confidence to navigate lease options successfully.
Welcome to REIPro Talk, where real estate investors turn for the latest news, tips, and tricks from the real in the trenches pros. Tune in to hear Chris Goff, the nation's premier real estate investing powerhouse. Join up with other top pros in the investing world as they cover every topic. No fluff, no filler, no holds barred. All you need to know from start to paycheck.
We're going to begin with the foundational overview of what a lease option is. Why are they a powerful tool for investors, agents, and tenant buyers? Next, we're going to dive into the mechanics of lease options, breaking down how they function in real-world scenarios and the benefits for all parties. We're going to explore the best practices for structuring lease option deals to ensure you understand how to run the numbers and how you profit. You'll discover how completing just one lease option deal a month can rapidly increase your wealth. This strategy often outpaces traditional investment methods, delivering a higher return on investment and enabling you to watch your financial growth accelerate. And finally, we're going to address the common concerns and hypothetical situations, providing clear answers and solutions to help you confidently navigate any of those challenges out there. For those of you that don't know who I am, again, my name is Chris Goff, and I'm thrilled to be here with you today. I'm a seasoned real estate investor. I've successfully closed over 500 deals, and I've shared my experiences through real estate coaching, YouTube, our software, and many other places. I'm also honored to be a 3-time best-selling author and co-founder of the REIPro software, a tool designed to empower fellow investors. Beyond real estate, I've ventured into the creative world as an executive film producer. My greatest passion is helping others achieve their financial goals and dreams through real estate. I'm also here today by real estate investor, professor, and a good friend, Eric Van Gorkum.
Great to be here. My name is Eric Van Gorkum, good friend of Chris. I used to be a student of his many, many years ago. I was interested in real estate investing and found Chris on the internet, found out his phone number, called him up and say, hey, I want to meet you and I need some coaching. I need somebody to kind of help me with the ins and the outs and not to make big mistakes and lose a lot of money. He became my mentor. I became his student. And then we ended up fostering a great relationship. Love to go play golf together, and kind of the rest is history.
It's great to have you here.
Thanks.
For sure. Understanding lease options, I call it taking control without taking title to a property, meaning the deed. So a lease option is a real estate agreement that combines elements of both a lease and a sale. It allows an investor to lease a property with the option to purchase it at a later date. People ask me all the time, so I'm just going to tell you, lease options can work for every single kind of real estate. It really doesn't matter. Although we talk a lot about single family homes only because it's the majority, you could do this for condos, mobile homes, townhomes, multifamily, commercial, land, businesses, bulk properties, anything. I want you to think about how you could apply this strategy to other types of real estate. Not many people actually really apply this to commercial. And this is, especially today's market, this is like a huge opportunity for a lot of people. Now, when we do talk about residential properties, usually they're located in a nice area with little to no repairs on the property. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go along. For those of you just kind of getting started, just trying to figure out what the heck is this strategy, I really want to break this down as simple as I possibly can. So the very first thing that you have is a lease agreement. This is where we agree to rent the property for a specified period, usually ranging 1 to 3 years. During this time, we're going to pay that monthly rent to the property owner, just like a normal lease agreement. Then we also have what's called the option to purchase. So more of a, if you think of a purchase and sale agreement. So along with this, the investor secures the option to buy the property at a predetermined price before the lease term expires. I personally like to set the price in the beginning because if the property appreciates, well, good for the buyer. That's kind of the whole point. I'm not one of those investors that says, hey, when you're ready to buy, we'll just see what it's worth at that time and hope that it's more. And you have to think about, well, what happens if it's less, right? Are you going to agree to that? So I do like to set the price in the beginning. Now, this option often requires upfront fee known as option consideration is applied towards the purchase price. A lot of times you'll hear me talk about that as a down payment. So if you hear me say down payment or option fee, option consideration, it's all the same thing. Flexibility. So the investor has the flexibility to decide whether or not to exercise the purchase option. If they choose not to buy, they can simply walk away at the end of the lease term. You think about a car that you lease, you put down a down payment, you make monthly payments, and at the end of the term, you have an option. You can either go to the bank and cash the dealer out, or you can give them back the car. So it operates very similar to as if you're leasing a vehicle. Equity building. So some lease options include terms where the portion of the monthly rent is credited towards the purchase price. This is going to help build some equity in the property over time. And then control the property. So we're going to control this property instead of actually taking the deed and having title to it. So I can come in and control it for very little money. And then in time, have that option to purchase it down the road. So let's talk about why would a seller do this, right? I mean, these are just probably a few that just kind of stick out to me. But number one is steady income. You think about a property where somebody wants to sell, but they can't sell. What do? They generally rent. Well, this is already a smarter way because at the end of the day, the seller really wants to sell. Reduce vacancy. Obviously, the tenant buyer in your property is looking to buy. They're not looking to lease the property and walk away in 10 months and go find another property to rent. Maintenance responsibility. I love kind of shifting some of that responsibility onto the tenant buyer because look, at the end of the day, they're going to buy it. They need to take care of the property. I have seen where buyers, when they invest more into a property that they don't own yet, they're more likely to actually fulfill that promise of saying, hey, we're going to buy this property. Plus, for the seller side, they're not getting a call, every single month. My toilet leaks, it's clogged, I've got a light bulb out. Those things that the seller typically has to take care of and spend money on, we're going to shift some of that over to the buyer. Non-refundable option fee, which we're going to talk about, but that's that non-refundable down payment. Again, it's applied to the purchase price. So this is theirs to keep regardless if the buyer buys or not. It's unlike a security deposit, which would be refundable if they took care of the property and then they left. Easier sale process. You've already got a buyer into the property that actually wants to buy the home. They've lived in the home prior to getting it inspected, prior to getting that financing. So this process of getting rid of the property is much easier. Tax benefits. For those maybe property owners out there that are like, if I sold the property today, I'm going to get nailed on capital gains. This is another great way to kind of delay that and move it to a different year. Obviously, you have a ton of buyers. There's a ton of buyers that can go to the bank and qualify. And then you also have a ton of people that can't. You charge them 0% commission. Your offer may be the only offer. You do all the work. You cost them absolutely nothing to do this. Let's talk about the tenant buyer. Low initial investment. Usually it's 3 to 5% down. And that's a general percentage that I like to use, but it really gives people time to improve their credit and finances. People, we all go through problems, right? It's up and downs throughout our life. You just went through a divorce or something happened in your life that you just need a little bit of time to get back up on your feet. Maybe, you got laid off from a job. It could be any one of those factors that allows you to get into the property today, get back on your feet, and then buy it down the road. You think about the qualified buyers right now that aren't buying because of the high interest rates. This is a perfect solution for somebody that can jump into a property that they want today, but not pay that high interest. Because generally speaking, from East Coast to West Coast, the mortgage payment on a property most likely is higher than what it would rent for. So this gets you into a property that you want to be in, you want to buy, but because of the high interest, maybe just keep renting. This is a great alternative to that. Obviously, you can build equity if you do have that in your agreement. Lock in the purchase price, as we talked about. Just test out the neighborhood, test out the property, make sure this is going to be a good fit. You think of just like leasing a car. Flexibility, immediate move in. Generally speaking, these properties are already ready to go. They have no work that needs to be done. They're livable. Maybe they were on the market. It's generally vacant. Doesn't always have to be, but generally speaking. And we wouldn't even commence the lease if the owner was still in the property anyways. We'd have to wait for them to get out. So, but for the buyer's point of view, this is something that they could move in immediately. Potential for appreciation because generally speaking, real estate across the board increases or appreciates about 3%. Again, every area is going to be different. No taxes to pay, right? So you don't pay property taxes because you don't own it. Remember, you're still just leasing it with that option to buy. Let me tell you why I love lease options as an investor. Number one, very little competition. I can tell you there's not a lot of investors out there that understand how to build a business around this. They don't understand how to connect the dots. To me, this is huge for a lot of people right now. Everybody, I get it. Look, probably 90% of the people that get into real estate start with wholesaling or they try to flip their first property, which flipping a house and rehabbing a house for your first deal, that's one of the hardest ways to get into real estate. So very little competition. You also have more deals to work. I want you to think about, we talked about, supply and demand last week. We have more inventory for sale than we did last year. That is huge for people if they can't sell because buyers have, I'm going to wait till interest rates drop. You're going to have more properties that aren't going to sell. This is a perfect solution. All you have to do is connect the two dots, the buyer and the seller. And obviously, you have to understand how to do it in order for it to work. And that's what tonight is really about. It doesn't require money. And although you can put some money into some of these properties, generally we're using the buyer's money to pay the seller. Okay, so it enables the person that, hey, Chris, I don't have that much money to get started, but I want to get started. I need to kind of get going. This is going to be one of those strategies that you can do without money. Also gives you immediate cash. The day that I do this deal between the seller and buyer, I get paid. I'm going to show you how we get paid in just a minute. It's another tool in the toolbox for you. Those of you that follow me, it's just too many investors. It's that one shoe fits all approach. It's that one trick pony, and all they know how to do is one way. And when it doesn't work, they hate real estate. You got to have multiple tools in the toolbox because the owner of the property, where it's located, and most importantly, the situation of the owner actually determines what strategy is going to work. So if you only have one solution, it's easy to say no. But if I offer another solution, such as a lease option, that could be a perfect fit. This one's huge, especially if you've been wholesaling. Like, we could pay full price and still make money, 100%. And I'm going to actually show you how to do that tonight. Passive income. We talk about cash flow. People want cash flow. No landlord headaches because we already have somebody in the property that is wanting to buy it. So it's not a typical tenant that we think of, oh my gosh, if they do this. Now, again, we're going to be talking about all those what ifs tonight. And I encourage everyone at the end to, if you have some more what ifs, let's talk about it at the end after the ones that I'm going to give you. Large pool of buyers, obviously, you talked about, and you're controlling the property without actually owning it. You're going to see the advantage of why controlling property is a great way to invest. Let's talk about structuring these deals. There are only two ways, and I'm talking very general here. Two ways to structure a lease option. The first way is where you simply put a buyer and seller together. You collect the difference in down payment, and you move on to the next deal. Okay. And I'm going to share with you why you would do that here shortly. Now, the upside, it's simple, fast, you're out of the deal, and you move on to the next one. The downside is there's only one profit center. Whereas the second way to structure a deal, a lot of people have heard what's called sandwich lease option. This is where you're going to stay in the middle of the transaction until the new buyer cashes everyone out. The upside, we're going to talk about three profit centers. So you get paid three different ways for every single deal, not one way, three ways. I can't think of any downside to this business, and I've been doing it for over 20 years. To learn more about lease options, including running comps, crafting offers, analyzing deals, you can sign up for a free trial of REIPro. Our platform is going to guide you step by step through the entire process. It's going to make it easier to master the lease options, grow your real estate portfolio. So if you're not a member of REIPro, and I know we have a lot of people that follow me are, but if you're not, encourage you to go here. Here are the three profit centers. Now, unlike wholesaling or rehabbing, where you only receive a one-time payment and then you need to find your next deal, lease options are going to offer up to three streams of income. You can earn upfront fee, enjoy monthly cash flow, and receive a substantial payout when the buyer eventually purchases the property. And I really want to break this down to you because I think when people see numbers, it starts to make sense. Just an example, and I want you to look at this is how we profit through the down payment. So I find a seller, somebody is wanting to sell. Maybe they couldn't sell. Maybe they're like, oh my gosh, I've got a vacant house. I'm making a mortgage payment on it and it's not selling. Usually, the first thing somebody thinks of is, I'm just going to rent it. So let's look at the terms between the seller and the investor in this example. And again, yes, you have to run comps, you have to verify numbers. And again, REI Pro can help you do that. We set a sales price at 350. Down payment or option consideration, again, remember that's going to be applied to the purchase price of 3,000 with a monthly payment of 2,500. So I need to research, what's the going rental rate for this property? You have Rent-O-Meter out there. Of course, you have Zillow out there. You could ask an agent that deals with this as well. Term of 3 years. Always try to shoot for as long as you can. Now, could you say 5? Yes, you could say 5. But again, some sellers may say, no, I'll only go 2. So again, that's going to be negotiable just as much as everything in this offer is really negotiable. But generally, what I like to do, and people ask me this all the time, is how do you come up with the down payment? Because, people think an owner of a property that they always like, no, I want 50 grand down. Yeah, maybe if you sell or finance the property, but not a lease option. Because if they were to rent this property, do you know how much they'd get down? Zero. They get a security deposit, which is typically whatever the monthly rent is. So I'm already offering something more than that. Plus, keep in mind, it's non-refundable. I'm then going to go find a buyer and I'm going to set new terms on this. I'm going to set the terms of the price at 375 at 12,000 down, which I believe is probably less than 3%, 2,800 a month with a term of only 1 year. Although I have 3 years with the seller, I'm only going to go 1 year with the new buyer. That's going to obviously the seller usually wants to be cashed out as soon as possible. They don't necessarily want to go the 3 years. We have a lot of sellers that actually do want to go 3 years. I'm like, well, we could buy it day one or up to 3 years. So always put the buyer on a 1 year term. That's how we're going to structure from the seller, investor, new buyer. I do want to point out to you, I don't generally increase the rental rate from what it is. So in this example, I would have to verify that this property could actually rent out for 2,800. And I know a lot of you are like, well, why doesn't the seller just rent it out for 20? Because they ultimately want to sell it. Plus, I'm going to share with you some things that the buyer's going to take care of as we go through this. That's going to save the seller some money anyways. The next profit center is the difference through the monthly payment. So again, the new tenant buyer's paying me $2,800, and then I'm paying the seller or the owner of the property $2,500. So that's going to give me a $300 a month positive cash flow. The last profit center is when the buyer buys the property. Okay, we'll talk about if they don't buy the property, that's going to be a what if. Assuming the buyer buys the property, we make that difference in sales price. Now, it's not what you think. A lot of people will look at this and say, oh, it's 25 grand. That's not correct. Remember, the down payment, the option consideration is deducted from the sales price. So if you look at the new buyer and the investor, 375, you'd have to subtract 12, and as well as the you and the owner, 350 minus 3. So our profit breakdowns are very simple. So first profit center is going to be the difference in down payment. We made 9 grand. The second profit center over the course of 12 months, assuming the buyer went the full 12 months, they don't have to, but let's say they did, 300 a month times 12. And then the third profit center, instead of 25,000, which a lot of people may be thinking, it's actually 16, right? So we're going to take 375 minus 12, that equals 363. Where what we owe the seller is 350 minus 3, that's 347. You subtract the two, it's going to give you 16,000. Of course, there's going to be some closing costs that's going to eat into that, but these are just the hardcore numbers because I want you to understand how the numbers actually break down. Total profit 28,600. Doesn't sound like a huge fortune over 12 months, but did you own the property? And how much money do you actually have in this deal? I want you to think about that. So I took the buyer's down payment of 12 and I gave the owner 3. How much money do I have? 0. So what's your ROI on that? This is the only business that I know of that you don't have to invest any money and actually get a return. That's what controlling real estate does. And that's why it's one of my favorite strategies. I want you to think about this. I wanted to put this ladder together and you'll see what this is, but I want you to imagine if you just did one deal a month for the next 2 years and you stop real estate. Not that you will, but let's just say you did one deal a month for the next 2 years. That's 24 houses, okay, or 24 properties or 24 condominiums, whatever it may be. I want you to see how this actually adds up. So if we look at year 1, so month 1, we go to 12. Eventually we get to, and I'm just taking the example that we just showed you, just the down payment, 108 grand, right? So that's 9,000 a month. That's more than most people make in the US a month. Look at your cash flow. So each property, you're getting $300 a month. So by month 12, you're at 3,600. Now we haven't sold anything yet because we just acquired these properties over the course of a year. So there's 0 on the sales price. Then we get to year 2, where we keep finding that next property. So month 13, we find another property, but guess what? Your first property is now selling. So now we can start to see where the sales price comes into play here. But the interesting part is you always have 12 properties because as soon as you lose one, you gain one. So your monthly cash flow stays at 3,600 a month each and every month. And again, we're going to get that down payment. We move into year 3 where we start to get rid of our last 12 properties. You're going to see obviously your monthly cash flow goes down and because we stopped real estate, not that you will, we don't receive a down payment. And then of course we'll cash each one out. Now this again would be best case scenario. Every deal is going to be different. I'm just using the same numbers. Some deals you might make 20 grand down. Some deals you might make less than 9. Okay, so obviously the numbers are going to vary, but I just want to show you how this adds up pretty quickly. So if you look at year 1, 131 grand on that. Year 2, 343 grand. In year 3, 211. That's almost $700,000. In even best case scenario, again, best case scenario, you have no money in this. You think about how long would it take you to actually save up that much money? And that's where the knowledge of this particular strategy, it's priceless. It's a much needed business out there, especially what we're living through right now. It's a great strategy. All right. I know this is what everyone came for. Now it's time we're going to answer those what ifs. So, this is where we're going to tackle the common concerns and hypothetical scenarios that many investors face when dealing with lease options. And I think by addressing these questions head on, we're aiming to equip you with the knowledge and confidence to navigate any situation that comes your way. So, let's dive in and let's clarify those what ifs. This is probably one of the first things that comes to mind, or at least probably one of the more popular questions people ask me. What if the buyer doesn't buy, the tenant buyer? What do we do? If you look at our previous example, remember I went 3 years with the owner, I only went 1 year with the new buyer. So could we extend that agreement, right? So we could extend the agreement if we have more time. Now, again, I want to make sure that people are, setting themselves up for success to buy. I'm not waiting till the last day of the term to find out if they're going to buy or not. Like, I'm going to reach out to the buyer like 30 days prior and say, okay, are we starting to get financing in place? Where are you sitting? Where are we at? You could find a new tenant buyer, right? So if they don't fulfill the agreement, they have to leave. It expired. So if you did go find another person to jump in, of course, you have 2 more years left. You're going to get another down payment, which you don't have to give any of it to the owner because you already gave the owner the down payment. So that would be 100% profit. You could technically rent the house. Don't know why, but you could. You could sell the home, or maybe you could turn it into a short-term vacation rental, maybe for a year. So you have options, especially when you control property. You've got options on what you can do with this.
A lot of times on lease options, when I have somebody that's interested in doing this, I will offer financial coaching or financial, basically how to run a budget and things like that to make sure that they can pay their bills, set up themselves, set up a savings account, and really kind of work towards actually buying this property. So by doing a little bit of homework, it helps them balance their budget, it helps them understand their finances, and it also puts them in a better position to buy, which is great for me in the long haul. So just little things that sometimes tenants do. You can always do it yourself. You can relay them to somebody else that does financial coaching, but it's a good little scenario that really kind of helps with the overall process, and it
Yeah.
better qualifies your tenant.
Yeah. And to add to that, just so you know what we do, Eric, we actually have our buyers go to mortgage brokers ahead of time, because a lot of our mortgage brokers that we work with will actually paint a roadmap and say, hey, you need to do this. You need to pay down your Amex $100 extra. You need to do this. And when you do that over 12 months, you're going to set yourself up to buy this property under that price and those terms.
Per-
So again, we're doing credit checks. Obviously, we are putting people in here because we want them to buy. There's some investors that are shady, that are like, I don't care if you buy or not because I'll make more money. Right? Like, come on. Look, I want people to buy. So we're not putting people in the house that we know that can't buy in a year. So we do have to qualify them in the beginning. What if the property value decreases? If it does, the very first thing I want you to do is try to renegotiate that price with the owner. Number one, this is not difficult to do if this happens. Most owners of the property just want to get rid of it at this point. They want to be done. And I promise you, $10,000 is not going to deter somebody doing this. I also want you to keep in mind, we don't charge a commission that comes out of the seller's proceeds to begin with. Owners of properties are more flexible if this scenario did come about. But you could just buy it the way it is, and the mortgage company is going to require the buyer to bring more money to the closing table or walk away. So you have that option, which hopefully that's not the option, I would much rather try to renegotiate that, especially if the buyer's in a position to buy, but it doesn't appraise at that amount. Generally, the appraisals will come right in of wherever a buyer is willing to pay because that's what an appraisal is. What if the tenant buyer tears up the home? I can tell you, I've never had anybody tear up a home. I've had a person, I think you know this, Eric, they actually put a pool in the yard. I've had people put up fences on the property. They've actually increased the value of the property, but it is a possibility, right? This rarely happens, but if it's really bad, like they put concrete down the toilet or, whatever it was, obviously the owner would need to file a claim with the insurance company. Obviously, the owner still does own the property and they are required to maintain the insurance, which will be in our lease option agreement on this. You could also get a security deposit. I didn't do this in the beginning. Get an actual security deposit plus an option. Here's where this is good. When something happens with the tenant buyer during the term and they know they can't buy it, at least in their mind, if they take care of the property, they'll at least get the security deposit back. They won't ever get the option deposit back because that's non-refundable. But that security deposit could also help with any kind of, maintenance or repairs on the home. You have to keep in mind, this is a different quality tenant buyer, right? This isn't a typical tenant that's in your home. Now, again, it's our job to qualify those people up front. But again, you never know, right? I mean, you never know. Worst case scenario, you'd have to take legal action if the deposit doesn't cover the damage, which I've never had to go down that road. I've never actually heard of anyone go down the road before. Again, it could happen. What if the owner refinances the home during this lease option period? A lot of people don't think about that. And I tell people this is okay as long as their balance is less than what you agreed. This all has to be spelled out in your lease option agreement. But let's just say the owner refinanced an amount greater than what you agreed. And in this case, when your buyer goes to buy, the owner's actually going to have to bring money to closing because now they've overfinanced the number, but we have sold it for less than what they owe. And that would have to be paid by the owner. Obviously, they could be sued over this. This is a major breach of contract right here because we're going to spell this out in the agreement. I have never ran through this situation, but it is possible. What if the owner stops making payments on the property? I want to just tell you first, you can always have the owner send you proof of each payment is made, or you could actually set up an escrow company to handle those payments for you. But if you do find out down the road that the owner's hasn't been making these payments, obviously this is going to go into pre-foreclosure. If it does go into pre-foreclosure, it could be bad, number one, but it actually could benefit you too, because they have a bunch of equity in this property and they haven't been making the payments. The property is going to be taken by the bank, period. You could actually turn this into a seller finance, make up the back payments, and then keep that lease option agreement with your tenant buyer in place, which if that's the case, what you promised to pay the owner would be a much higher price if they had equity and you get in at a much lower price now because they're getting ready to lose the property. So that could actually be more beneficial to you if that were to happen. It has never happened to me. Generally, I think, when we talk about working with nice homes and nice areas, when I think of lease options, you actually are working with people that really do care about their credit. They care about the property. If you're doing lease options in the war zone, that's where you're going to have problems. What if the tenant buyer stops making payments? All right. So they stop paying you, number one. This is so important. Reach out to them. Communication is so important in this business. Some people don't like to talk about problems, but if you reach out to them and find out what's going on, a lot of times you can work with them. So don't just assume, "Hey, okay, you're late and we're going to put the hammer down on you." Look, at the end of the day, we want this deal to go through. Sometimes there's speed bumps along the way. So find out, number one. But obviously you could evict them. But when you do, I want you to keep in mind that you need to continue to make the payments to the owner until you put another lease option tenant in the property. Now, when you do put another buyer in the property, you're going to get another down payment, which could reimburse you for some of those monthly payments. So keep that in mind. I always say when you get, any kind of down payment money, just don't go buy a Ferrari with it or something. Like stash some of that away because, real estate, you're going to have things come up and you just want to make sure that you're prepared for that.
If they stop making payments, again, you probably really need to qualify your tenant and buyer. So going to the mortgage broker is a good idea, but also qualify them. So yeah, background checks, credit checks, all those kind of things, because you don't want anybody to come in and because they're seriously about buying a house. So they have to have some, they may have a credit ding or something like that, or divorce, but you still want to qualify your tenants and thus buyer before you agree to rent them that house or lease them
Yeah,
that
and,
house.
and if you think about it, Eric, we are living in a time where qualified buyers could be your buyer, which is strange to say with this strategy.
Yes.
I only put this question down because somebody actually asked me this at one of our seminars. What happens if the owner dies? The property is going to go through probate with the existing lease option agreement in place. That has to stay in place. Otherwise, it's immediate breach of contract on the owner, which unfortunately the owner's not here anymore. But obviously, you need to find out who to make payments to. But here's what typically happens if somebody does die. The probate process is usually not something that is happens in 24 hours. This is a process, and a lot of the court systems are backed up. So you may need to start making the payments directly to the bank. You need to figure out who's potentially going to take over this property. Figure all that out. So you're going to have to investigate what's going on. Now, a lot of times, if this did happen, somebody would probably go to the property and say, "Hey, I know my parents own this property," or something of that nature. So, but obviously, that lease option agreement would stay in place. The judge would not void this contract that was already in place. What if the home is not livable? I always say this: don't put a lot of money into a property you don't own. A little bit of money, you need to mow the yard, tighten up things, patch a few holes. I'm okay with that on a lease option, but good lordy, do not put like 30 grand into a property to fix it up to do a lease option when you don't even own it. I don't lease option properties that are not livable because this could potentially create problems. You think about it, this is a big, let's say you have no heat in the house, right? Eric was telling me this story, even though it was just a rental. You have no heat in the house. That's going to be a problem. You have no running water. This is going to be a problem. You really need a home that is livable. It's at minimum rentable. And think about this, the person that you really want in the property, they wouldn't even do this deal and they surely wouldn't put down 12 grand in a property that is like, "Oh my gosh, I gotta put all this extra money into the house. I can't even live here." And I'm not talking about if, I don't like the color of the paint on the wall. I'm not talking about it doesn't have granite countertops. I'm talking about it just needs to be livable. It needs to be in good shape. It needs to be clean. It needs to smell good. Everything needs to work. What if the property requires repairs during just the lease period? What we do in our lease option agreement states that the tenant buyer is responsible for the first $500 in repairs and maintenance costs per occurrence. The owner's insurance would need to cover anything over that. So if the air conditioner went out, okay, depending on the policy of the owner on what their deductible is, let's assume that the deductible was $500. The buyer is going to pay the first 500, which would fulfill the deductible. That means the owner wouldn't have any money out of pocket. But if their deductible was $1,000, the buyer's only responsible for the first 500. You have to keep in mind the owner still owns the property, but it does save them that first 500. For those of you that are curious, yes, you can purchase our lease option agreement inside of REIPro software. It's going to spell all this stuff out. It's $50, just so you know. What happens if the home burns down? This one's tricky because I've never heard of it, never experienced it. I just know that it's going to be a problem. This one, probably of them all, I don't have an answer to because I'm looking at, okay, the tenant buyer, obviously, depending on how it burned down, obviously, if it was the tenant buyer's fault, then this wouldn't be a problem. But let's just say that it wasn't their fault. I have no idea at this point what would happen outside of everybody's lost in this case.
Or the insurance would pay the owner directly. But yeah, what do they do at that point? So, I mean, the tenants, buyers should have renter's insurance that to cover their personal belongings. But how the chain of ownership go would be a good question because, yeah, I mean, legally, they were going to buy the house, but the house doesn't exist anymore. They could probably rebuild the house and still give them the option. Or in this case, you might have to just give them their down payment back and call it a wash and
Yeah,
move on.
this one could be the worst what if right here. What if the home gets burglarized? You know, you just said it, Eric, which we obviously state in our agreement. Number one, you need to have renter's insurance to cover your belongings inside, period. And obviously, the homeowner has insurance on the property,
It does not, the homeowner's insurance does not pay for any of your belongings. The
right?
homeowner's insurance pays for the structure and the building, but it does not pay for anything inside. So that's why it's imperative that you have to have renter's insurance that covers everything inside your house, your personal belongings, if you're the tenant or the buyer, your computer, your couch, your jewelry, all those things. That's why it's imperative. And most of the time, if you're doing this, you should require, along with background checks and credit checks and things like that, requirement that your tenant buyer does carry renter insurance, and you need to see the policy to be sure that it's a true active policy.
And we have that stated in our agreement as well. What if the property is listed with an agent? This is actually much easier than a lot of people probably think. Number one, we have to make sure these numbers are actually going to work for the owner, but also make sure that the agent's going to be taken care of. Now, generally, if it's just a lease agreement, they would only receive half the security deposit. So in that case, I would require security deposit, and then half of that would go to the agent. You could also structure this to where they get a portion of the option payment. This would have to be paid by the owner. So it would have to come out of the owner, whatever we're paying them. This is probably the least likely is that the agent could receive a commission when the buyer buys. Most of the agents are going to take probably half the security deposit in this because obviously if the property didn't sell, they're turning around and renting it. Or if they originally were renting it and we talked to them about doing a lease option, either scenario, that's the most likely is the security deposit. But I want you to also understand that you could structure this in a few different other ways as well. What if you can't find the tenant buyer before you have to start paying the owner? Just to kind of take a step back, clarify, I could sign the lease option agreement today, but not actually have it commence till September 1st, as an example. And what that does, that allows me time to get that buyer and put that buyer in that property. Now, of course, I'll always tell you that if you're doing this business, you should always be obviously marketing for buyers that are looking for properties like this. So try to extend the commencement date with the owner if you can. You could start the agreement, and hopefully you're going to get reimbursed when you eventually do put in a buyer. I can tell you my very first lease option deal was on a $450,000 townhouse in 1999. That's how expensive it was back then. That's where Northern Virginia was super expensive. And I went ahead and paid the owner up front. This is my technically, this was my first real estate deal. I never really talk about it because I messed it up, but I broke even on it. I didn't lose money, but I broke even on it. So what happened was, is I paid the owner $2,500 down, $2,500 first month's rent up front. So I had 5 grand invested in this deal. And I didn't even have the 5 grand. I only had 25. I had to call my best friend, see if he'd loan me 2,500 to actually put this deal together. And it took me all of 30 days to find someone that was willing to put the exact same amount, 5 grand, which literally just covered my, expense on that. So they put 5 grand down and then they paid 2,500 a month. I was like, I'm out of the deal. It is a risk, but when it comes to real estate, you're not risking a ton of money here. Like somebody could easily mess up a rehab and blow 30 grand. So we're not talking like that kind of money, but just keep that in mind. I always say if it's a home run deal, Eric, get the deal secured right away. Make the owner happy because you know what you're going to make money on that either next month, 2 months, or in the future. You're going to make a lot of money with that. You could walk away. Obviously, all contracts, we're always going to have our disclosures in those contracts. All of our contracts in REIPro already have those disclosures. So you could walk away, but you found the deal. You got to try to make this right. What if the property has little to no equity? So this is where I talked about we could actually pay full price. And those of you that have followed me, if you seller picks the price, you pick the terms type of thing. They pick the terms, you pick the price. The one thing when there's no equity, don't stay in the middle. What's the point of staying in the middle if you're never going to cash out at the end? There's no point. Your only profit is through the down payment. So this is where you would structure this as we talked about structuring a lease option the very first way. You're going to put the buyer seller together, collect the down payment and move on. I thought I'd show you an example of how this actually works. So the terms, I'm going to go back to the terms here. The sales price, 350. Let's say the owner, really has no equity in this property. They can't list it with an agent because they'd have to pay a commission. They don't really want to rent it. This might be the perfect solution. We agree to the 3,000, 2,500 a month. If you're not going to stay in the middle, you just put everybody on a 1 year because you're not in the middle. You're not wondering if the buyer doesn't buy, extend the agreement because you're not in the middle. And then when you set the new price with the buyer, the new sales price is 100% dictated by how much they put down, because I want you to think about this, and I don't want to confuse anyone because this really is simple. If you look at what you agreed to pay the seller, 350 minus 3, you owe the seller 347. That's what the owner is expecting to get for the property, 347. But if I find somebody that can put 8 grand down, all you have to do is take 347 plus 8, and their price would be 355. So 355 minus 8 equals 347, exactly what the owner agreed to take. If that were the case, you would make 5 grand in this example. And this is assuming the house is worth 350. So if it's worth 350 today, we could sell it for 355 because that's a future price. That's not today's price. That's a future price. I don't want you going like, I'll just sell it for 390. Here's the problem. When the buyer goes to buy, it's never going to appraise at that amount. So there's no point of structuring that deal and misleading people down a road. That's never going to happen. So you can still pay full price. To me, this is full price and still make this work. So just a quick recap. Just remember, you are leasing the property with the option to buy. This is not, I repeat, not a seller finance. Completely different strategy. So keep building on the foundation. I always say if you build a strong enough foundation, you can answer any question about a lease option. Structuring offers is the key. And obviously determine if you could stay in the middle or not. I just showed you an example of when you would not stay in the middle. And don't let these what ifs stop you from reaching your goals. I mean, this is a great strategy. And especially in these times that we're in where we have an abundance of property that are on the market, you have the opportunity to also work with qualified buyers, which is kind of funny for me to say that because usually it's not a qualified buyer, because if they were qualified, they would just go buy it, but they're holding off. This is a strategy. They can get into a property they want today and then buy it down the road, because obviously interest rates will come down. It's just a matter of time and when, right? So I'm going to invite you to be a part of my exclusive group, what I call personal coaching. This mentorship is you're going to be able to learn from my years of expertise. You are not going to learn from a team member or somebody that I pay to coach you. You're going to work directly with me. So if you want to learn more about working with me one on one, I'm going to help you master real estate investing. I don't care how old you are, I don't care your experience level, I don't care where you live in the country. Go to my website, chrisgoffrealestate.com, click on coaching at the top, fill out the form, and then it'll take you to the details. You can then schedule a one-on-one 30-minute call with me, not somebody that works in the office. I will talk to you directly because, again, this is personal coaching. I need to talk to you. You need to talk to me. We need to make sure that this is a good fit. I can explain all the details, how it works, how it could work for you.
Having a coach is always a good thing. I can't say enough about that. It's a good thing to have a coach or a mentor, whatever you want to call it, to kind of help you guide you along on the process. So definitely recommend that. That way you don't make mistakes. Because a lot of people get into real estate and they don't know
What
all
you
the
don't know,
yeah, they
that
make
this is what
mistakes.
hurts.
Yes, definitely. Erwin just commented that he was totally impressed with the REIPro system. He's new to wholesaling and he likes the Deal Pro especially. So
Well,
just shout
thanks,
out
man.
to the software.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Another question from Mark. He's in San Diego, California, and was just curious what distinctions or what areas are good or bad in California.
Here's the thing with California. I love working with properties that are more expensive, and that's everywhere in California right now. For you to buy an investment property from somebody, like your mortgage payments through the roof, but the rent value is totally different. This could be a huge opportunity for those people in California or any expensive market where you can get into a property cheaper through rent, wait for those interest rates to come down, and then buy the property. That's huge. I don't know of a bad area, and I've worked with numerous students in San Diego.
Can you work with real estate agents to find a seller that doesn't mind selling with a lease option?
Yeah, absolutely. It goes back to what I said. Well, number one, there's a couple of things here. There are more houses on the market than last year. It's like 30% more, by the way. It's a big number. A lot of those properties aren't going to sell. The agent's not even going to make a penny. I always say something is better than nothing, especially because, it's a lot of work. And then you're hoping that the buyer's going to come in and it doesn't always happen. Then they're losing you think about, you put yourself in a listing agent position. Like if I were an agent, I would be doing this 100% of the time. Here's the thing with listing agents or a buyer's agent, but listing agents specifically. You come in, you do comps, you do all this, say, I think we can get this. Then the property doesn't sell. And the first thing an agent says, we got to lower the price. Then it doesn't sell. And then the buyers that were looking at the property are going, wow, there must be something wrong with that house. Why is it still for sale? And then next thing you know, the owner is getting frustrated with the agent because I thought it was going to sell here. Now you're telling me it needs to be dropped, the price, and then it doesn't sell. Those agents, if they could bring this solution to the owner, I bet they'd be motivated by that time to say, you know what? I'm going to end up not selling it anyways. And then I'll be forced to rent it anyways. This is a better solution. I think where people mess this up with agents, and it's not your fault per se, it's getting the agent to understand exactly what it is you're doing. Because if the agent already understood what you are doing, they'd be doing it.
That's what I've seen a lot with agents. They don't understand their mindset is just to sell the house, and I've talked to a lot of agents like, well, would you approach the owner with a lease option? And they're like, what is that? Or no, because they say no because they don't understand it.
Right.
And if you can get to a point where you can actually talk to the owner and explain the process, most of the time the owners are like, well, yeah, it's been sitting on the market for 90 days. I'm in. Let's try it. Let's go with it. Opposed to, just sitting there even longer
Yeah,
and lowering the
agents are way
price.
more open to it now, by the way,
Oh yeah.
because of so this would be the time to talk to agents.